Alright guys, this is Mr. Shreve, and we're ready to learn how to write a simple paragraph. The focus of this is citing evidence and integrating quotes. This is a basic need for writing, and it is simple, but that doesn't mean that it's not difficult. Alright, so let's begin. Alright, first we start with the rules. 1. You gotta come prepared, which means you must read. If you did not read, you will have nothing to write about. And following the reading, you must think. If you did not think, you will have nothing to write about. You can't get around these two. You gotta read and you gotta think. If you didn't do these, you might as well go back and start over. Alright, that doesn't mean you have to like it. You can write about something that you didn't like or you didn't find interesting. That's actually just as valuable. In fact, remember, all criticism is critical. Alright. Number 2, have your favorite quotes pulled before you start. You're going to do this in your Cornell notes. So as you read, you're going to take down some notes and pull your quotes like this. Format. You list the speaker. That's the speaker, not always the author. For example, in a novel written by Edgar Allan Poe, you might have 3 to 4 characters, right? In Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, it makes a big difference if it's Huckleberry speaking or if it's Tom Sawyer. Alright, then you need an rhetorically accurate verb, the quote, and the page number. When I say rhetorically accurate verb, we'll get into those more later, but right now I'll just say the word says doesn't always convey the meaning behind the quote. You got to make a connection between the way that the speaker feels or what they're trying to do and the quote. For example, Huckleberry Finn yells at Jim. Or the mother in Joy Luck Club cries at her daughter, right? So rhetorically accurate verbs connote what the speaker is doing with those words. All right, you also need hashtags. 2 hashtags per quote, that's the minimum. If you get more, that's fine, but don't spend too much time on these. I usually list off like 2 or 3 just at the top of my head before I get 1 or 2 good ones. Alright, for example, Mr. Shreve requires that all quotes must have hashtags, page 1. You see that Mr. Shreve requires. That kind of tells you what's going on. Hashtag always making connections. Hashtag making it meaningful. Alright, because that's my goal with hashtags, making connections and meaning. Alright, so let's move on. Step 1. First thing you got to do, you're reading along, find a quote or piece of evidence in the text that you find interesting or meaningful. This is where it all comes from. This is where it starts. You're reading Percy Jackson, and you see how he reacts in a certain situation, and you think, that doesn't seem like a heroic trait. Or, for example, I was reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu when I found this quote by Mei Qian, in which he argues, "That which depends on me, I can do. That which depends on the enemy cannot be certain." Page 85. Alright, so you got the quote, and you write it down in that format. Speaker, rhetorically accurate verb, and the quote. Now what do you got to do? Well, first, you never say, "in this quote," or "this quote means." Alright? We know it's a quote. Alright. You got to list who said it. You'll notice, for example, in this one, Sun Tzu is the author, but Mei Qian is another speaker in the book. All right. You've got to get what did they say? What did they say? As accurately as possible. All right? You can't leave things out. You can use ellipsis or parentheses, but we're not going to get into that right now. Right now, you just got to get the quote as it was said. Find a quote or the part of the quote that's interesting. All right, where did they say it? All right, so you can see in this one, the quote comes from The Art of War, and it was on page 85. So with my bibliography, knowing which version to read, they'll know who said it, what did they say, and where did they say it. Anybody can fact check this to see if it's accurate. All right, before we go on, just a few more rules. In the first quote, you must give us the context and tell us who wrote it and where. Was it a book, a magazine, an online blog? You got to give us that context. The second time you quote somebody from the same source, you don't need their first name or the source. You just need their last name, the quote, and page number. So for example, if I was going to quote Mei Yao Chin again, then the next time I would just say Yao Chin says, quote, page number. All right. Actually, I wouldn't use the word says, but nonetheless, let's move on. All right, step 2. What does the quote make you think? You see that word think is coming in. As I said, you have to read so that you can find a quote, and you have to think. You got to know what you're thinking. Here's why it's important. I read this quote, and I was thinking, life is like war. Do not go into it unprepared and depending on others. Now, I could have phrased this a little different. I could say, life is like war. You should not go into it unprepared and depending on others. But for me, I was speaking kind of directly to my students because that's what this quote made me think of. All right, so let's break that down now. That's what we call a claim. All right? A claim is an opinion stated as a fact. Do not say, in my opinion, or I believe. You save those words for when you're in a discussion, an academic discussion. For example, you're sitting around in the class discussing a text that you read together. Then you'll say, well, in my opinion, Sun Tzu is right because, or I believe that Mei Yao Chen makes a good argument. But you don't need to write that because we know it's your opinion. If it was someone else's opinion, you would have told us. And you would have quoted them and cited your source. All right, so let's move on. Let's explain step 3. Explain why the quote makes you think that. How does the evidence prove your claim? All right, so down here you can see written in green, right? I have written what we call the analysis. And this analysis is supposed to support exactly what I said up here. Up here, my claim says, life is like war. Do not go into it unprepared and depending on others. So my opinion is that life is like war and that you should not go in unprepared or depending on others. The analysis. Sun Tzu is writing about war, but success in life follows the same principle. We are always facing difficulty and competing with others. If we depend on others, we cannot be certain of our success. They may not really be on our side. We must train and prepare for our own battles and strengthen ourselves. All right. So, I was thinking, some people completely depend on their parents, and yet even their parents aren't really on their side. Sometimes parents are on their own side. This happens with friends, relatives, in just about every case. I'm not saying that all of your friends and relatives are really in it for themselves and selfish, but you never know, and you can never be certain. All right, so that was the analysis. Now, you'll also see that up here, I said life is like war, and then I talked about being unprepared and depending on others. And you can see down here in the analysis, I talked about being prepared and depending on others, right? So if we depend on others, we cannot be certain of our success. Then I talked about we must train and prepare for our own battles and strengthen ourselves. All right. So the analysis directly relates to the quote and proves the claim. Oh, by the way, you can just explain the hashtags from your notes, because if you've made good hashtags, it will relate to good analysis. That's why I ask you to pull your quotes and make sure you have hashtags. If you do that as you're reading along, you pretty much have an essay written before you're done. You just have to put it together. All right, well, that's it. A simple argumentative paragraph includes a claim up here at the top, like a topic sentence, a quote pulled directly from the text and accurate, and analysis. A more complex paragraph just has more evidence and cites more sources. So if I was writing a little bit more complex paragraph, I would add another quote, and I would analyze that quote and prove how it supports my claim. All right, so those are the basic three parts of a simple argumentative paragraph. Now, we're not going to go into this in detail, but I'll just tell you. A simple informational paragraph is very similar, but includes a main idea, an example, or detail, followed by analysis. For example, if I was writing a paragraph about essays, I might include a sample. I might just use a detailed description of the structure. After the important details and examples would come a short explanation of importance, explaining why the details matter. Okay, so first you need to know how to integrate a quote, like these examples here. I put these up so that you could see how the commas and the quotation marks work. Here's how it goes, all right? Before a quote, the comma goes on the outside, comma, quote. It's the same thing at the end of a quote, comma, quotation marks, all right? So they always go in that order, comma, quotation marks. Now, there are times where you don't need a comma, and there are times, for example, in his article, quotation, nobody listens to me. Now, that's the title of an article. Mr. Shreve from the University of California, Davis claims, blah, blah, blah. All right. You can see in this sentence, in his book, Mr. Shreve, Why Teach, Mr. Shreve proves, you can see that a book is underlined, whereas an article has quotation marks or italics. Mr. Shreve proves that 99% of students listening to music on headphones are not paying attention. You can see that I said that 99% of students. All right, the reason that this doesn't have a quote is because this is one complete sentence. I took the quotation marks from the article and put them directly into my sentence. Now let's move on. All right, you can use these sentence frames for integrating your quotes. According to X from source, comma, quote, blah, blah, blah. And then in parentheses at the end, the author. Now that's last name, okay? You don't need the full name. And page number. The full name will go in the bibliography at the end. All right, so these sentence frames should help you be able to write your paragraphs. Notice I give you here a list of rhetorical verbs. Don't use says. You can use it once in a while during an essay, but overall you really want to stick with verbs that tell the reader or your audience what the author was really trying to do. Were they claiming? Were they making a claim? Were they making an argument? Were they suggesting? Were they explaining? All right, so this is a short list of rhetorical verbs. The instructions for you in writing your paragraphs will be on the Google Classroom, but you can use this screen to pause if you need help grabbing sentence frames during your writing time. All right, good luck, and thank you for watching.